So, this afternoon we'll be tackling about nutritional considerations in the critically ill. Not necessarily tackling the malnutrition in our critically ill Philippines. You can just imagine the boy smiling as if walang problema ang Pilipinas. Hindi siya malnourished, no? But look at what's happening now. We became very malnourished because of weakness of some other few Filipinos, rather than concentrating on the Filipino upliftment today. But that's only to grab your attention. So don't think so much about it. So I hope the second to the last lecture will be a little bit hot and spicy for your consumption this afternoon. I was overwhelmed by the data. The slides actually that I gathered was around 256 slides. I turned it down to 100 copy. I tried to trim it down a little bit more, but I could not do so. So I will make it a little bit faster this time. So the objectives would be the following. We try to define starvation, stress, and including the definition of malnutrition and the critically ill. I will try to present the ACCP consensus guidelines a little bit faster. Then we'll try to look at the current systematic review of evidence when it comes to nutrition in the critically ill. And of course, the recent ACCP nutritional management protocol in the ICU. When we talk about malnutrition in the critically ill, it's actually a disorder of body composition. When macro or micronutrient deficiencies occur, when nutrient intake is less than required, which will result into reduced organ function, abnormal results in blood chemistry studies, reduced body mass, and of course, less optimal clinical outcomes. Worldwide, the current rate of malnutrition in the critically ill patients is pegged at around 40 to 50%. In a recent survey done by the Philippine Society of Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition last September 21, they varied at around 60%, much higher compared to the usual international rate of around 40 to 50%. If you look at in some institutions in our country, St. Luke's Medical Center had a prevalence of 48%. If you look at that, malnutrition actually is defined not only of underweight patients but overweight as well. Okay. So if we look it further, to really look at the problems when it comes to malnutrition in the critically ill, these studies will just tell you that actually inadequate nutrition and attention is poor when it comes to nutrition in the critically ill patients, particularly among admitted patients. Okay? So what is the pathophysiology on complications of malnutrition? So as I said, because of reduced food intake, you will have the following problems. And the implication would be the combination of all of this will decrease the lean body mass and eventual reduction in work capacity, which eventually will impede the patient's hemostatic response to stressors, particularly critical illness or surgery. This is just to give you further what will happen to the following organs during response to stresses. Okay? So, I will not elaborate for you, just kindly read it a little bit fast. Translating it further into tissue injury, sepsis, this is actually the response to tissue injury. If you look at that in the first 24 hours, so you have actually shock. For example, you have a problem. Ideally, if you can be able to resuscitate, then of course you will go into the recovery phase. But if not, then you will go into the systemic inflammatory response syndrome. Good if you can go for recovery, but if not, secondary organ failure and eventual progressive failure will occur. And of course, mamatay din itong pasyente. Diba? Okay. So, mo na ang problem. How about starvation? They say that starvation is actually a clinical situation now, where you can supply like proteins and calories inadequate actually to meet the nutrient demands aimed at preserving the lean body mass of a particular patient. So here, insulin decrease became the stimulus for its secretion is eventually reduced actually because of this. And so you have cortisol and glucagon being the counter-regulatory hormones increase relatively to mobilize what? Other energy from other sources. Okay. This is just to have a bird's eye view what will happen if your glucose is decreased due to starvation. So you will promote what? Glucose generations from your what? Fats, ikan sa muscle, sa protein, no? And other what? Chemicals, no? From the body. Sometimes they will result into anaerobic what? Metabolism or oxidation. Just to produce an energy in order for the patient to survive or to cope with the stresses, particularly the illness. They say, after we had the previous elaboration about stresses and starvation, they say that a patient who is under critical illness is actually is actually in between, between starvation and stress. And if you look at that, metabolic rate, is usually increased, when it comes to critical illness. Hormonal response becomes very, very highly erratically increased, Body fuels is wasted, body protein is wasted, everything almost is wasted, And even the immune response is impaired eventually. Okay. So kaya itong mga tutukan why nutrition in the critical ill becomes very, very important. These are the specific things that will affect the critical ill when malnutrition is not corrected. So you will have impaired immune response, increased susceptibility to infection, poor wound healing, increased recursive liquidous ulcers, overgrowth of GI bacteria, etc., 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 down to increase in morbidity and mortality. Furthermore, to look at the individual and organ alterations, if malnutrition is not corrected, you can just imagine what will happen, especially in times of sepsis and septic shock, or other morbid conditions. So, what we should be dedicated on pasyente ba? Because of this and organ alterations. Before we understand how to go about with the goals of nutrition and nutritional support, we should also understand the phases of metabolic response to critical illness. There are actually 3 phases. The first is the F phase. It usually occurs in the first 12 to 24 hours. Remember the tissue injury slide that you see, that you saw earlier. The initial phase was that of the F phase, characterized by fever, highly febrile and patient. Oxygen consumption is relatively actually increased, and of course the inner core body temperature will be decreased and vasoconstriction is very characteristic. The F phase is actually governed by your sympathetics and your pituitary adrenal axis. Then comes the flow phase. This is characterized by hypercatabolism. Catecholamines actually predominate. Negative nitrogen balance ensue and fat utilization.